So let's take a look at how we can create an API to facilitate our modal showing and maybe notifications such as errors or confirmation messages like snack bars or toast messages. And the main thing that I want to focus in this graph that I have up is that our API, which we call overlay API, is going to be completely decoupled from the main app. So they're going to be two siblings. Reason for it is that we don't want to nest our overlay inside of an app because some changes, let's say CSS changes like stylings, are relative, like Z indices and I believe positionings, and they can affect how our modal backdrops look like or how the depths where Z index is. And to avoid any of that possibility, if we decouple them and make them siblings instead of nested elements, we should be completely fine. Now, there's another way to avoid that. If let's say you have nested components and in this component you're rendering some type of elements and you don't want it to be rendered in this React DOM element, you could use React portals to create kind of like a separate container to render things in. But for this video, we're going to avoid React portals and we're going to create our own solution to the problem. Created a React app and cleaned it up a little bit and added a new component called Modal. I didn't want to bore you guys with showing how to create a white rectangle with a X in the corner, so I figured skip that and do it behind just to show it what's going on. So this Modal is just a functional component. It has a div called Modal. Inside of it, it has a Modal close button, which is just an X character. This can be replaced with a proper icon, but for now it's gonna do the job. And if you look at the styling, I just give it min width 500 pixels, height 300 pixels, so we have this nice rectangle. Gave it white color, border radius. I made it relative so that I can position this close button absolutely by saying top and right 10 pixels, so it just takes from the top 10 pixels and from the right 10 pixels. Give it a cursor pointer so that we know that it's clickable. Well, for now it does nothing, but the idea is that it gives user feedback that you can have an action on this. So that's basically what I did behind the camera. Now to just kind of talk a little bit about the API that I have in mind before we start creating this file and coding. So my idea was that instead of creating, let's say, some type of component that we're going to render, right? So let's say if we make an overlay component that would take this modal component, right? And then just use it to show it and hide it, right? So we would just always import that, let's say import, overlay. And then once we import it here, we would say, something like overlay, and then we would pass, well, maybe we'd wrap our modal with, right? And then put our modal in here, and then, our overlay would say, show, and we would pass some kind of state variable saying, true, false, and we would show it. I didn't want to do this because once again, you're kind of rendering these things inside of this component, which is in a hierarchy of elements, and these elements could affect the look of it and etc. Instead, my idea was something like, hey, we imported this overlay. Let's make a new instance of this overlay. And let's say, I don't know, let's say overlay API equals new overlay. Call it like that. And then we would say overlay API. And let's say we'll have a method on it called show modal. And then inside of here, we would pass a modal here like this, right? And then we would see this populate. So that was the difference in idea when thinking of more like an API rather than a component that you're gonna toggle on and off. So now that, let me clean up the things that I fudged around here with. So now having that in mind, we can start working on this this utility. So we're not going to call this overlay component. We'll probably say it's more on utility side of things rather than a component. So I'll create a new folder in the source, call it utilities. And inside of utilities, we'll just call, we'll just say new file. We'll call it overlay.js. So now we have this overlay.js. So the main thing that I was thinking with this is that when basically getting making an instance of this overlay, I'm thinking that I want only one instance at all times. So let's say if we were calling it from component A and component B, both of them they get the same instance, right? Kind of like a singleton idea. And the reason for it is that imagine, A and B components are both populating modals. So if we didn't have instances, these modals might start cluttering. So they're, maybe you'll have two modals on top of each other. So, but if we have one instance, we know if we have that already, right? So if we already have a modal, replace that existing modal. Well, in fact, that's going to be default behavior. So that's, let's say if a modal exists there and you just call another modal through the same API, we're just going to replace the existing modal with a new modal. So it's not stacking. And mind you, this might not be the behavior you want. You can obviously adjust that, but that would be the default behavior of that. So since we created this overlay, and since we're going to be using quite a bit of React functionality for it, and an easy way to create a singleton class, right? Singleton, what is it called? Pattern is using a class. And it's much easier to do that because we can take advantage of React. So we can create a singleton class while extending the component, right? So here we'll just import React as well as the component, so that we can play with this. And I'll show you real quick what I have in mind. So we're going to export default class, call it overlay, extend component, extends. And here we'll say, for now we'll just render and return null, just for the purposes of example. So now if I go to my app and import this overlay, and this overlay is inside utilities overlay. Okay. And now inside of your function here, what we can do just to play around, we can say, well, let's make overlay A just for funsies, and we'll say a new overlay. So we'll make a new instance of overlay, and then we'll say const OB, so that's another one, and we'll call the same thing. We'll create another instance. And if I say OA equals OB, this should be false, and it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Oh, well, I guess I need to say B, not OA. So it's no surprise that it's false. We created two different instances, and if we say that instance A is equals instance B, well, obviously it's not, because it's two different instances. So now my idea is, no matter if you call it new overlay, we're still gonna have the same instance. And to kind of do that, we can go into our overlay component, and inside of our constructor, let's just do some boilerplate super. Here we can say, well, we can set overlay instance, kind of like a place where we can track, what we have, to this, right? To basically itself, the whole overlay class, right? We set it to this, And then when we're creating the new instance by calling new, here we can do something like, well, let's check if overlay instance exists, right? So we'll say overlay.instance, and if it does exist, we're just going to return this instance. So now once we save this, we expect that this false becomes true, because first time we're creating it, we'll say OA, right? This will be false. So we'll just set it right here. At this point, we'll skip this. We'll say, well, the instance doesn't exist. Then we set it. The second time we're calling it, we get to this part in the constructor and say, well, does overlay instance exist? It does. Well, return that instance, right? And that instance is the same one as the one previously created. So now if we save this, you see that we have true, right? So now we kind of made this little thing that we can create an instance of this overlay by just cleverly returning the instance, right? So, and I could call like millions of these, and they're all going to be the same instance. So that was the idea. So now we have a single instance that we can keep track of things, right? So now let's say this modal is currently just in our app, kind of dropped inside. So let's say we'll just remove this from here and add it into overlay, right? So let's import this inside of our overlay. Import modal from, I think we have to go up into components, then modal, then modal. So you might think that this is kind of silly that I'm putting a component in its own folder, but I like to keep CSS files and JS files together, so I kind of know exactly where the styles are for that specific component. I'm not really used to using component styles where we just pass it as an object into the. I don't really like that. I like using just CSS files and making sure that the naming convention is unique enough for each component. So you know, I like that. Definitely not something you should be like, oh, that's a must do. No, that's personal preference. You know, do you. So okay, where were we? Okay, so we imported this modal, and let's say we'll just return this modal for now, right? Just to make sure that we imported it correctly. We currently don't have this overlay anywhere loaded, right? We're just kind of messed with it inside of our app.js here. We just kind of imported, but we then didn't return its content. And like we said before, the overlay is going to be, well, let me just copy that so that I don't have to type it out. So we said that it's not going to be part of main apps DOM structure or component structure. We said that we're gonna make this as a sibling. So if we go to our index where our app is being dumped into this element of root, and we'll say, well, we can import this overlay, wrap the whole thing in the fragment, and make these guys siblings. So now here we have this overlay, put it right next to app. And now since the stylings are off, it's not like correctly styled, all we see is just white here with this X. So we just have to create a little bit of different stylings whenever everything is loaded into overlay. And we'll do that by, I'll just create another file inside of utilities, and we'll call it overlay.css so that I can dump some CSS. Well, we also need to kind of wrap this guy in something. It's currently just being dumped by itself. And we'll change this up. This is just for now. I'll just make a div called overlay, and then we can put this here. And then let's import the CSS file. Overlay.css. If I didn't screw anything up, okay. So here, we'll just say overlay. So let's make an overlay div basically a backdrop, right? So that we can position things easy in it, etc. So we'll just make this guy position fixed. We'll give it top 0, right 0, bottom 0, and left 0. We'll just basically create a blanket for it. And then we'll say background color. Oops. Ooh, this guy. Come on. We can do this. Background color, I give it RGBA. 255, 255, 255. Make it nice and white, and then make alpha as 0.3s. And now if we save this, we see that kind of the color got a little bit more washed out for the what's it called, the background, but for this guy's still not centered, right? So to center it, I love using Flexbox. I'm really used to it, so I'll just make this guy flex, display flex, and I'll just make justify content center, and then align items center as well. So now if I save it, it's nicely centered, and it just works, right? So this looks all right. I think that's all we need. Maybe flex direction, make it column, so it behaves more like a regular div rather than start stacking side by side if we dump more than one element directly into the what's it called, backdrop, right? So this overlay is kind of acting like a backdrop. Okay, so now we have overlay. This is our backdrop. Inside of the backdrop we have a modal. So now how can we make this so this is rendered only when we want it? So this is not necessarily the best way to do it, but I kind of like doing this way. So we'll just create a new method called modal, right? And this method will return this markup, right? So we'll just copy the whole thing here. And what we can see before that, we can say, well, let's create our state too. This.state, and we'll call it modal content, or just call it modal. Well, for now, let's call it modal, make it null, so there's nothing there. And we'll say, well, in this modal method, we'll call it, well, if this.state modal, basically saying if this exists, let's render this stuff. And now else we can just return null, just I guess for tidiness, right? And then inside of this render, we can just say, oops, I'll just create a fragment, and we'll just return this dot modal, right, like this. And we see that there's no modal rendered because there's nothing there, right? But now what we can do is we can create a method here called, let's say, show modal, right? And then when we call this show modal, we'll just this dot set state, and we'll say modal, true, right? So we can do this. And inside of our app, where we can also import this, did I have? No, I didn't already. So we have to import overlay here. I don't know why I deleted it. From utilities, overlay, right? So now here, let's say we create a button, right? And open modal. And give this guy on click open modal. Open modal. Well, open modal. And here inside our app function, we'll just say const open modal. And here we'll just say, let's get an instance of that overlay, right? So we'll say overlay API equals new overlay, like this, right? And then here we can say overlay API dot open modal. Is that what we called open modal? Show modal. So we'll just say show modal like this. All right, let's try this out now. So now click it, we have this modal pop up, right? So now I have a method to open this modal, right? So currently we have no values in there or anything like that, but for now that's good enough. Well, now let's create a method to close the modal, right? So then whenever we click this little X, we can close it. And closing, I also prefer to be handled from here, right? Because that's all our structure, I mean, all our logic here. So because we'll be passing this close modal around, we need to bind the method. And to bind it, I think using like ES6, you can just do an arrow function inside of a class and it will be bind automatically, I guess, whatever the magic happens behind it. So we can say, instead of dot bind this, we can just say overlay, just arrow function. So let's say we'll create a closed modal, right? And instead of doing it like this, right, we'll do an arrow function, so that we can pass this guy around and it will not complain. And when we do this, we'll just refer to this overlay state, set state, and we'll say, come on, I don't see anything. Modal, right? Modal to null, right? So now let's say to close it, we want to close whenever we click this X, right? So we need to pass this close modal method into our modal. So let's say our modal goes just close, right? That's simple enough. And we'll just pass this dot close modal. Close modal. Okay. So we do this, and then inside our modal, do I still have it open? Yep. Inside of our modal, we can say that's our X. On click we'll say, we can just simply say this. We don't need to do this. We can do just props.close. So now if we open, did I make a, oh, it's no longer working. Did I break something? Modal, this dot modal, null true, am I passing this correctly? Close modal. Why is it not opening anymore? Let's try and figure this out. Props.children. So if I just remove this, did it still complain? Okay, so there's something going on with this guy. So maybe we just need to arrow function it. Like this. Yeah, it didn't like, I guess it was instantly invoked as we passed it. Props. Okay, well, I guess this works, right? So there you go. So now we have a way to open and close this modal, right? Well, that's neat, but we still want to pass some kind of markup here. So that's the next step to actually do this, is to, if you look at the modal, we see that, you know, we can, this modal component accept props.children. So in our overlay, well, we can say, so we can show, close it, no big one, right? But here we can say, well, instead of passing just kind of opening, showing it, we can wrap something with it, right? And inside of here, we can pass, well, let's do this dot state modal. Dot modal. Idea is that currently we're just setting true false to this value. But instead, what we can set this value to is to be the markup that we want to show, right? So if we call show modal and we pass something here, right? So we'll say, you know, what do we say? Content, right? Instead of setting it to true, we'll just set it to content. Now it's not working because this content is undefined because we're not passing anything. So now if we go back to our app and we say, when we call show modal, let's say we'll pass an H1, right? So we'll just say H1 and we'll say hello, right? And now if we open it, we see that this hello is now passed into that, right? And when we close it, we set it to null, so nothing exists. Open it again, it's hello. So right here, just for the quick example, let's say we'll just create function. I don't know another app. No, very smart naming, which returns some kind of div. Inside of that div, we have another div. Inside of that div, we'll have maybe H3, and then in that H3, we'll say, I don't know, another app. I know. Should have probably prepared a little bit better. But here we could say, let's pass that another app. Just like that. Right? So now we pass this guy, and when we open it, we just have this another app inside of our modal that we just created there. And here we could say, well, maybe this another app, let's see, takes props, right? And we can pass something to it like, I don't know, text. Well, yeah. Well, actually, let's do a quick example like this. Let's pass a button just to kind of show you. Button. Come on, here you go. Click, right? And then here we can say on click, we're going to fire some kind of function. Let's call it log message, right? Now let's create this const log message that's going to say something. Log message, so we're just gonna console log a message. Hello there. I know, I'm just full of great ideas today. So now if we open it and click this, you see that we have this hello there. So we're passing these values relative from where we are. So in this API, you could just create whatever you want. You don't have to like weirdly pass by reference. Well, you actually are passing by reference, but you know what I mean. You could just do whatever logic you want, and you don't have to worry about how that logic is inside of that modal, because this modal is an absolutely different DOM, right? It's not in the app structure, but it's still able to do what you want it to do. Mind you, have to, you know, make sure that if you need to bind things, you bind them. If you don't, etc. Right? What else? So I think that's a good way. And let's say, so that's a modal, right? So we can open it, close it, whatever. Now let's say we also want a little toast message. So those, what are they called? Snack bars, right? So we'll say, let's say you clicked something and, well, give me something like, oh, I did something, or I failed at doing something, right? So let's say we're going to create another guy. Instead of called modal, we'll call it snack bar, right? Snack bar. And we'll do the same thing. And we'll say if this dot state dot snack bar, we'll say return some type of markup. And this markup, we'll just say a div, call it snack bar. Well, let's create a separate component, since it's gonna would be messy if we did this. So for now, we'll just return null here just to kind of keep the thing happy. And then in our components, let's create another folder and call it snack bar. snack bar. All right, once again, we'll just give it a new JS file called snack bar, as well as new CSS file, snackbar.css. Now let's go to our snack bar, import React. We'll just make it a functional component. It's awesome that you can mix functional and class components. It's great. And then we can import our CSS file. So we'll say snackbar.css. And we'll say const snackbar. We'll just change it up if anything. Well, it's going to be a simple guy, so we can just return it straight. Let's say div snack. Maybe, no. We'll probably want to create that snack bars close themselves after like 3 seconds or something like that. So maybe we'll need it a little bit more complex. Well, not complex, more logic to it than just 0. So we can return, call it snack bar. Instead of snack bar, we'll have once again, no, I think that's fine. We can just make snack bar and we'll just put props.text here. So we're not going to wrap, we're not going to allow some kind of custom content inside of it, because it's going to be just the purpose for a snack bar is just give some kind of text message, right? So let's do that, and then let's go into our CSS file, snack bar, make sure call it by a class selector. Well, we're gonna position once again. Let's do a position fixed. Well, that's not how fixed works. Okay, fixed, and then we'll say right. How many? Let's say 20. Well, do we want left? Well, let's do left. 20 pixels from the left and 20 pixels from the bottom, right? So it's gonna be in this lower corner, left lower corner. Give it what kind of background color? I guess white, since we're going to that scheme, and then just color is going to be black. So we're not going to see anything here. No, I just need to export this. Snack bar, well, export default. Snack bar. What else? That's it, right? So now we can go into our overlay. Kind of like the way we imported this modal, we can import this snack bar. Snack bar. Well, if we didn't make any mistakes, it shouldn't fail too much. And here we'll just be returning snack bar. What are we doing? Oh yeah. So we don't need this parentheses. We can clean it up a little bit. Return snack bar, and I believe we set text, and just pass text in here, which is going to be this .state .snack bar, right? That's what we said. State snack bar. Okay. Yeah. So now we'll just create in our state. We'll just create another snack bar. Make it null by default. Render return. What did we do? What did we break? Oh, maybe because there's nothing returned. Well, no, default is this, still this. Parsing error, unexpected overlay. What did we do here? Snack bar. Did I screw something up? Return. Unexpected token. Did I delete something? Am I like missing some? No, that's not it. That's closing. That's there. So this .state. Let me get back. Let me try to figure out what did I do here. So I found it. I didn't close my snack bar. Sneaky snack bar. Okay, so now it should be okay. Okay, now here below we can just add once again this dot. We said, what is it, snack bar? Yeah, this dot snack bar. So nothing's happening because we're not showing any snack bars. And now we just need to create a method to show and hide these snack bars, right? So it's kind of, let's just make some spaces here. The show modal, and let's do show snack bar. Do we need it as, no, I think we'll be fine without binding it. Show snack bar, and we'll just say once again text, and this dot set state, and we'll say snack bar equals text, right? Is that state snack bar? Yeah, I believe that's fine. So now inside of our app, we can say, let's say, make another function called show snack bar. And we can just grab this guy. Grab this guy and say, what are we gonna say here? Oh yeah, we're showing snack bar. Okay, overlay, so show snack bar, and then we pass whatever text we want to it. So we'll say overlay API dot show snack bar, and we'll pass whatever text, I don't know. Successfully click the button. All right, now we'll just add another button. Oop, what just happened? Did I click on something? Where was this guy? All right, there we go. I don't know why I have this file structure expanded so much. I barely have any space here. Button. Okay, and we'll say show snack bar. Right, and then we'll do on click with small l. Show snack bar. Right, let's see. Boom. Obviously we didn't style this anything gorgeous or anything like that, but let's do that. That's just hideous. Snack bar, let's give it some padding. 10 pixels. All right, we can kind of pixels, give it let's say border radius 5 pixels. I think 5 pixels is like the sweet spot for the radii. Okay, I think that's fine. Maybe background color should be black and make color white and give it a border. Like border 1 pixel solid and color. Let's see, like a little lighter color, black. So I'll just type black and then click on this guy. Here we go. And then let's make it lighter, like something like this. Nah, it doesn't look like anything there anyways, so we don't need that border. That's fine. Okay, I think that's reasonable. That looks a little bit better. Now let's make this snack bar just disappear by itself, right? So we want to call it and it just goes away whenever we want. Well, not whenever we want, let's say after 3 seconds, so it doesn't stick around here. Okay, so snack bar. So we have a way to show snack bar. Let's close snack bar. Close. Is that what we call it? Close snack? Yeah. Close snack bar. We'll make it bound, and we'll do this dot set state snack bar null. And then we're just gonna pass that here. Close equals this guy, this dot close snack bar, like that. And if we go in our snack bar, we could say, since we're using here functional, we can use use effect. So let's grab the use effect from there, and then use effect, call this guy in here. And here we'll say when we load it, set timeout to do something after 3 seconds, right? And it would be props.close if I'm not mistaken. Well, let's try. Props. Oh, that's not the. I think that's the one. Let's see. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. Well, that worked. So obviously we want to clear those set timeouts. So let's say if we added like a little X button here, and that would manually close it. It's something to think about too, whenever you click that, so that you clear these timeouts. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to show. So now you could import this overlay from anywhere within your app, kind of like globally existing API. And that's what I mean by API. So currently we're just calling it from our app, right? But we could just nest it deeply in whatever the siblings or children that they have, as long as you just import it correctly, right? You just import this overlay and then just call it like this. All these methods are available to you, so you can call them here. And let's say, mind you, let's say in your modal you added here a footer that has, let's say, cancel and close and save or something like that, or okay. And let's say when you click cancel, you want this to close as well, right? But currently you would need to pass that cancel, right? So here, when you're creating this, let's say, let's actually do this, where this click, right? So I have this click button, click. So here I could just simply say, well, let's call this close, and I want to close this modal, right, with this button click, right? That the inside of this, I just need to pass this overlay API, right? So I will say overlay API, and I'll just what did we call it? Close modal? Yeah, close modal. So we can just pass that there. Close modal, right? Well, let's see. This might, let's pass it this way. Right, so now it should close it whenever we click it. Yeah, so here you go. So you can close it from within without much effort, right? Because you have a reference to that instance. So you can just drop it anywhere. It's relatively simple. So now this is closing from the modal itself, and this is closing from the content that you just passed, right? And then you have our little snack bar, 3 seconds, it's gone. Alrighty, hope you guys enjoyed.